No, I thought you covered it well.
Okay, so yesterday we were looking at Marcel Duchamp, and there were several really. So there were some issues that he is most responsible for. Do you remember any of those things? What is he most well renowned for?
Shifting the focus away from art.
He didn't shift it away from art, but he shifted it from one thing to another.
From conceptual to the art.
Need to come to
Conceptual.
He moved it from the importance of technique to conceptual thinking. Why is that so important?
Is it commenting on the value of wisdom?
Yeah, he did. He was very much commenting on the value that we place on objects. But there's something else. How does it impact our understanding of contemporary art?
Wasn't that like a changing point?
It was a changing point, major changing point. But why is it so important to us as a 21st century contemporary audience?
Change what art could be.
Exactly. It changed what art could be. Now, yesterday I spent quite a bit of time talking to you about what happened at the beginning of the 20th century. So we set up the context in which Duchamp was working. And we start to work out that Duchamp's a fairly intelligent individual who he himself obviously got bored fairly quickly with the intellectual investigations of art at that particular point in time. I also told you that he was not only a Dada artist, for which he is best remembered, but he was also involved in Futurism, Cubism and Surrealism. But it's what he actually, I suppose, explored and pushed really hard as a Dada artist, which was, as a result, Dada came about because of the atrocities that followed the First World War. It was an anti-art art movement. He starts to question who makes all the rules. And that wasn't just in art. He was questioning who makes the rules in society. You know, who were these despotic men that took us headlong into First World War in the first place? And we know that, that Germany gets the blame, but really, it always takes two to tango. Is Germany really responsible? And so he, being a very intelligent man, and I'm sure he had plenty of intelligent friends as well to debate this with, starts to rethink the whole operation of how the world, the Western world, operates. And in so doing, he starts to reconsider who makes the rules with art. He's very much aware of what Manet did with Déjeuner sous l'Herbe and how that was antagonistic and upset the status quo of the time. Here we had Manet in 1863 creating an artwork that didn't have a clear narrative. It didn't fall into one of the particular areas of art making. Is it a figurative work? Is it a landscape? Is it a still life? What is it? We don't know what it is. And oh my God, look at the way that the paint's been applied to that. That is ugly. That's not how art should be made. So we know that there were sort of artists along the period of time between Manet and Duchamp that started to really challenge what the subject matter of art was and how you actually applied the paint to the surface. But it's not until we get to Duchamp in the early 20th century that we really start to see that there's a challenge that was thrown down by Baudelaire, the poet, that if you're going to make art about the world in which you live in. Early 20th century art is dealing with the angst, again, that anxiety of the world in which we find ourselves in. It's a world in a state of flux. We don't know what our future is. Who are we as humans? Are we really as evil as this war has just shown us to be? And we know that modern art, from the time of Manet all the way through the 1970s, modern art is essentially the pursuit by artists to try and find out who we are, why we're here. It's existentialism. Who are we? What is the human condition? And we still see evidence of that flowing on into contemporary art today, trying to make sense of who we are, where we fit, what it's all about. So this is the context in which Duchamp's working. He's in the 20th century and he's going, well, hey, have a look around us. We're a mechanised society now. We have factories that make stuff. We don't need an individual artist to make a bespoke object that there's only one of them. That's just stroking one individual's ego that they are fantastic and nobody else can make that. And he said, really, what's it offering anybody in terms of oohing and ahhing over this wonderful technical skill that does not advance us intellectually? He said, take a look around. There's plenty of great things that have been designed by designers that we have in our homes. Take the urinal, for example. It's a great piece of work to demonstrate what he was trying to say. And that is that art should be about pushing the audience's understanding of the world in which they live in to greater context, a broader understanding. I'm not sure whether I said this to you guys yesterday or not, but if you can think about what Duchamp did and how contemporary art has really adopted and refined this, this is an analogy which will help you always to remember. A piece of writing that is fictitious, a piece of fiction. It's an imaginary story, it's made up, yes? Okay. What's the point of that story? You tell me. Why would an author go to all the trouble to make up a story? To entertain? To educate? And in that education, because we push for time, I'll move along. They present to you new perspectives on how you can think. They actually offer you new thoughts. You may have the same perspectives, but you haven't thought of it quite in that way. And so this book takes you on a journey, but all the while it's actually introducing you to new subtle ways or really profound ways of thinking about the world in which you live. And then by the time you get to the end of that book, you've changed. Because you've taken on and learned some of these new ideas and you walk through the world with a new perspective on, time travel or whatever the case may be, and your imagination has been ignited. Art, contemporary art, thanks to Duchamp pushing us all along back in the early 20th century, is doing the same thing. The point of contemporary art is to do the same thing as a work of fiction. It's not about making work that's pretty, not about great technical skill, although we do see contemporary artists do that, and we just ooh and ah over, oh my God, that's just amazing. But it's about broadening your understanding, giving you new perspectives, helping you see the world in different ways that you may not have seen beforehand. And the fact that those artworks that you look at are difficult for you to get your head around is the intention of the artist. It's very, very different to what happened up until the time of Duchamp. Whenever anyone looked at a work of art, especially up until the time of Manet, your audience already knew the story. They knew the backstory. Did I tell you this yesterday? Yep. They knew the mythological story. They knew the historical event. They knew it. They'd read the story in the newspaper, whether if it was Géricault's The Raft and the Medusa. They know the backstory. And so the artwork that they're looking at, they already are uncomfortable. They're at ease because they know what they're doing. They know the story. They not have to exercise their brain to try and get their head around, what is this person trying to communicate with me? Where contemporary art, that's exactly what's happening. I took you to the Biennale. What happened? I run around having heaps of fun, going, oh, look at this, come look at this, and you're going, I don't get it. What is she so excited about? Learning so much. It's big. I don't get that either. I don't understand. How was that girl's out? Oh, yeah, it was all right, miss. Because you guys, you're coming out of it, but you're still stuck back there where you think that there's one answer, that you think that you can go into these things and have all the information and go, yeah, I know what this is about. It's not about that at all. Contemporary art is not interested in actually giving you the answers. It wants you to discover the answers yourself. It wants you to be confronted. It wants you to, you know, think about things that you hadn't before. And for me, the most fun artwork at the Biennale on Cockatoo Island was the work with the swinging pendulums. I mean, it was so experientially driven. It was so much fun. And every time I went through that maze, was how much faster can I get through these swinging pendulums? Let's wait until it swings really, really, really fast and then see how well you can get through without being touched. You know, it's just the competitive nature that I have. And, you know, being a kid and having fun and the playfulness and the humour, and why does art always have to be serious? And then I can step back and go, wow, you know, the mechanics behind creating this, it's like being entertained if I went to, say, Coney Island when I was a little kid and I had to get through those planks that moved, or the spinning cylinder that you've got to walk through and not fall over. I mean, it has that sense of playfulness. I still don't know what that word meant, but I loved it. Remember I was telling you that art museums are about entertaining just as much as about education? That's what Duchamp's responsible for. He started it. So contemporary art owes so much to Duchamp. I must emphasise that he's not a postmodern artist. However, there was a question in the exam that you just sat. It was question 8, therefore it was a frames-based question. And the question was, explain how postmodern strategies are used in art to encourage critical debate. I'll say it again. Explain how postmodern strategies are used in art to encourage critical debate. Now, if students chose someone like Duchamp, or even people from earlier, who actually had, loosely, postmodern strategies in their work, and we can look at Manet, he did do that. We can look at Duchamp. We can look at Rauschenberg, who you're about to have a look at very soon. These people use postmodern strategies to create critical debate. So just because they're not postmodern artists doesn't mean that they haven't inspired postmodern thinking that has then gone on to have ramifications in the future, which is now the present time. Okay, so don't get freaked out if you get into the exam and you go, oh, Duchamp would fit this beautifully, but oh God, Miss said he was not a postmodern artist. He is responsible for laying the foundation of postmodern thinking. So you can talk about him in context with postmodernism. All right, but just make sure that you're crystal clear that you know he's not a postmodern artist. This particular piece of information, I think I've said this over and over again. You can come back and have a look at this at your own leisure, remembering that Google Classroom has this slide projection, slideshow available to you, as well as yesterday's lesson recorded, and today's recording will also be available to you as well. So here we have Duchamp being, you know, the great provocateur. He's always playing the game. Here he is playing it again. We know all this stuff already. I've talked about it quite a few times already in the last 2 days. Where I want to go to now is to this guy here. This is Duchamp on the left. On the right, we have 2 artworks by a fantastic American artist who recently passed away, and his name is Robert Rauschenberg. Now, I may or may not have told you yesterday that Rauschenberg, he went off and started, I think he did a pharmacy, he started off doing a pharmacy degree. He was a very intelligent man, but he was asked to cut up a live frog, and he went, nah, that's it, I can't do that. And he ended up dropping out of college. He ended up becoming a merchant seaman, travelled the world, ended up in France, bit of a wanderer for a while, hung out with the French artists, went to art school there. They were all doing reproductions of early 20th century artists, and he went, all they were doing was just changing the colour, that's not for me. So he ends up back in America, and he ends up in North Carolina, and he goes to Black Mountain College, which is quite a I suppose, an avant-garde art college for its time, and a lot of really big names from that time in history all went to this same place. And they were taught by a Bauhaus, which Bauhaus was an art movement in the early 20th century, mainly out of Germany. A Bauhaus artist, and he didn't like him so much, but the man taught him a lot. And this guy introduced him to Duchamp's theories. Now, Duchamp plays a big part in his thinking and in his practice even. And so, for example, his art-making practice is a combination of painting and sculpture that have been jammed together into a new form or a new expressive form called combines. And you'll hear about that in a moment on the video. But the way he would actually collect the materials for these artworks is he would actually have this, I suppose, ritual that he went through each day where he would get out of bed, have his breakfast or whatever, and then he would choose one block in the area in which he lived to walk around and collect stuff to make his art with. And if he didn't find anything or he didn't find enough, he would allow himself one more. And so he collected bits and pieces, stuff that was thrown away by his neighbours, and he would make art out of it. Now that art was made from the things that his neighbours threw away. And what he said was that a society reveals itself by what it throws away. Now the very interesting thing about Rauschenberg is he's making these works in the 1950s. And remember, I keep telling you, you've got to understand the cultural, the historical context of what is going on in their environment that influences. And for Rauschenberg, he's an American. The Americans think that they're pretty amazing. They think they've won the war. We've got the abstract expressionists who are #1 in the world, so much so that by the 1950s, late 1940s, the centre of the art world has shifted from Paris to New York. So in all things cultural, in all things amazing, America sees themselves as the new hope, that the place to be. As a result of the Second World War, I'm just giving you an understanding culturally of what's going on here. The American government team up with advertisers. And their agenda is to manipulate their population to spend money. And they have to get people to make stuff. So they need people employed, and the stuff that these people are making, because they've been employed, needs to have a market. So they then get the advertising agencies in to market really hard that, everyone needs to have a car, because in the 1950s, not everybody had a car. So you don't have a car, you need a car. If you want to be anyone, you need a car, and so do you. Your next door neighbour's got a car. What's wrong with you to get a car? And if you get this car, you've got more credit than if you have this car. And so everyone in America, you need a washing machine. Stop scrubbing over the tub with your hands. Get an automatic washing machine. Fridge, much better than an icebox. And so this really big push between governments and advertising agencies working together to get the American economy moving along. And it's this big push for consumerism. Now, Andy Warhol becomes really, you've got to understand with Andy Warhol, I'm a little bit off track a bit here, but Andy Warhol was a graphic designer in the 1950s. He was a trained advertising person. And he worked in conjunction with the government in his advertising agency as a part of the propaganda manipulation team. He knew how to manipulate an audience. He knew what to do. And so when he becomes a fine artist, you watch him employ those same skills as a fine artist. So this is a cultural context. People are walking around being inundated that you don't fix stuff anymore, you chuck it out on the side of the road, the rubbish man will come along. The man needs a job. Make sure you put rubbish out for him to pick up. And we've got Rauschenberg walking around very intelligent man, realising that the stuff that's getting chucked out, he doesn't have to buy, so he's not paying for expensive art materials which he can't afford anyway. And he's looking at it as a social commentary. What are these things saying about his contemporary America? And of course, Duchamp has got quite an impact in terms of art doesn't have to be pretty. Art doesn't have to be technically well made. What does art have to do, girls? Cause your audience to question and think. Okay, so this is what he's on about. All right, watch this video. There's two to watch, but this is the first one.
Who's Robert Rauschenberg? Robert Rauschenberg is my personal hero. Rauschenberg is one of the most fecund artists of the second half of the 20th century. He married painting and sculpture. When he did so, he invented a word to come up with the thing that he had done, and that word was combine.
What is a combine, and why do we use that word with Robert Rauschenberg's work as opposed to, say, assemblage or construction?
The word combine has a couple of meanings. On the one hand, it's the combination of painting and sculpture into a third term.
Rauschenberg is deliberately trying to frustrate our preconceived ideas of what sculpture and painting are. Is painting made with paint? Is sculpture seen in the round? He's really not interested in those questions.
On the other hand, combine is his method. It's literally the combining of all of these different elements. Whether it's paint squeezed directly out of the tube, his shirt, a stuffed chicken, a tire, a stuffed goat, newspaper clippings, photographs of a lover, whole pages of the newspaper, combined into one compositional form.
Rauschenberg was really interested in taking things out of the real world and putting them in an artwork. And he wanted to do that because he was interested in the world. He's interested in non sequitur. He's interested in these collisions, the way that these things are going to collide and make sense or not make sense or make a weird kind of sense together.
We're made to be aware that we look at works of art from someplace, from within the world. We're not in some kind of outside zone, voyeuristically looking upon a scene, right? That the works of art and our own relationship to them are happening in a kind of shared space.
Rauschenberg is often quoted as saying he wanted to work in the gap between art and life.
It's not so much that art and life are polar opposites. It's suggesting that they're two poles of a continuum and that the gap is not mere empty space. That's where everything is happening. That's the texture of our lives. It's the things that happen in the background, so to speak, that we're not focused on because we don't think of it as special. Art is something we pay attention to. Life is something that happens on in the background.
A lot of people, when they look at a Rauschenberg, they see mostly the life stuff. They see the stuffed goat. And it's hard not to. It's a stuffed goat. But on the face of that stuffed goat is pain. And so I think that tension between those materials that come from everyday life and the materials that come from the sphere of art is the way he's able to get at that space.
I'm not so sure there is a gap, or there was a gap for him. I feel like the way he was making art was the way non-artists are also living life, which is to say, we're social, we're human, we're interacting, and that was just his way of doing it.
Rauschenberg gave artists an enormous sense of permission. As long as you are committed to seeing your idea through to its logical or illogical conclusion, you get to do whatever you want. That's enormous. Yeah. He's my hero. He's totally my hero.
Okay, what I wanted to say is, you notice that with his work, It's not pretty. Did you notice that? And he's really confronting his audience when you look at the work. He's making them uncomfortable. Could you imagine in the 1950s? I mean, I've even taken kids into the art gallery of New South Wales. I looked at his work, like, oh, Sir Rauschenberg, and they go, I don't get it, miss. I don't understand. I don't listen to anything I've said. He's actually commenting on the world in which he lives. We have this idea that an artwork has to be this polished, finished piece. And yes, there does need to be an element of resolution in your idea, in your material practice. But Rauschenberg and Duchamp are more interested in how those objects that are hanging on the wall in the gallery broaden our little minds. That's what they're interested in. Now this work, this video here is a Khan Academy video. So it's the annoying couple with their annoying voices. But if you need to refer to a specific example, if you decide to go and deal with Duchamp and you need somebody else between Duchamp and the 21st century, or whoever you happen to talk about in the late 20th century, maybe you might like Takashi Murakami, who's the last person hopefully that I'll get to, is Rauschenberg's bed is a lovely example, and we're going to talk about it in detail.
We're on the 4th floor of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and we're looking at Robert Rauschenberg's bed. This is a combine, not quite a sculpture, not quite a painting, from 1955.
So combine means a combination of painting and sculpture.
Well, Johns and Rauschenberg were actually thinking about their art as between art and life, and what is that narrow space between the two.
So instead of thinking about it between painting and sculpture, between these two things that symbolize fine art in a grand tradition, inserting life into that conversation.
Life and wit. So what we're looking at is, in fact, the stuff of a real bed. We're looking at a real pillow, we're looking at a real pillowcase, at a handmade quilted blanket, sheets, but if you look closely, you're also seeing pencil and paint. And of course, all of this has been taken out of the horizontal where you could lie down on this and put up on the wall.
And I'm reminded of Pollock painting on the floor, and then those pieces of canvas being picked up and put on the walls of the museum or gallery. And the other way I'm reminded of Pollock is in all the drips that we're seeing here.
And this is a reference that Rauschenberg wanted you to come to.
The Pollocks are just 5 years old, the great drip paintings.
That's exactly right. This artist wanted you to be thinking about Pollock, and this is really a confrontation with Pollock, with abstract expressionism broadly. That was the dominant contemporary art at this moment, 1955. Pollock would die the following year.
When I think about abstract expressionism, I think about the personal, subjective experience of the artist on the canvas. And so I guess it makes sense to me that this is a bed, a place of our unconscious, of our dreams.
But I think it's also tongue-in-cheek, this notion that the abstract expressionist canvas was somehow the manifestation of the internal state of the artist. Rauschenberg is saying, you really believe that? Well, let me give you the actual sort of arena of the dream. I'm going to give you my bed.
So you think he's making fun in a way?
Absolutely. Artists, for instance, sometimes talk about the kind of Oedipal relationship between Rauschenberg, a younger artist, and the abstract expressionist that he was friends with at this time.
So that makes this a kind of in-joke.
1955, in the work of people like Johns and Rauschenberg, is the moment when art moves from being modernist in its sincerity to a kind of postmodern attitude that is responsive and that is self-aware, a kind of hyper-self-awareness.
So we could understand that as a switch between modernism to postmodernism.
Or sincerity to irony.
It is true that when I think about abstract expressionism, there is this attempt by each of those artists, Newman, Pollock, Rothko, Motherwell, the great artists of the abstract expressionist movement, each one of them has a very distinctive individual style. You can't say that there's an abstract expressionist style because it's completely dependent on the individual. And so there is that idea that the painting is this manifestation of their personality, their psyche.
And so what happens here is we have an artist who is subconsciously imitating that idea of the authentic. And if you look closely, the drip had become, by 1955, almost a kind of emblem of the authentic experience, of the authentic moment. And here that is being replicated. And so there's a kind of irony that's built into it, and I think a kind of stepping back from buying that notion that art can be this true internal thing.
By virtue of copying what is supposed to be someone else's individual style, there is a kind of irony, a kind of self-consciousness there, a kind of adopting for another purpose.
But then all of this is laid over the found objects or objects from Rauschenberg's bed. So there's something incredibly personal, but also absurdist here. And that's why Johnson and Rauschenberg are sometimes referred to as neo-Dadaists, because they picked up the mantle, the flag of people like Duchamp, who are interested in irony, in playfulness, in a reprising of ideas, and reconstructing of a vocabulary of meaning.
Well, it's true that Duchamp took on the tradition of Western art in all its seriousness and high-mindedness. And I can see that here with the Rauschenberg in that commenting on the sincerity and seriousness of abstract expressionism.
Okay, so you've got some understanding, I would say, of Robert Rauschenberg's work, but I still think that you're completely lost as to what exactly is going on here with his work. So if I was to say to you, tell me something about abstract expressionism, you'd probably go, well, you haven't taught us anything, miss. We don't understand anything about abstract expressionism. Okay, let me explain something to you so that you understand the irony that is contained in this work, especially Bed, which is the one I want to refer to. Abstract expressionists, as I said, had managed to shift the focus from France to New York as the centre of the art world. Abstract expressionists were also a reflection of the world in which they lived in. They just come out of the Second World War, and some of them were still working during the Second World War. If you can imagine living through a period of world war, it's not a pleasant space to live in. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of lack. And realistically, a lot of the work that you see with the abstract expressionists is what we see typical of modernism, which is this desperation to understand who we are as humans. But they went to such an extreme of looking internally, trying to understand who we are by going as deeply as they could into the subconscious and even into the unconscious. So much so that they started to look at traditional people like the North American Indians. If it was an Australian, which there weren't at that time, they would have gone and contacted the Aboriginals to try and find out how they saw and understood and made sense of the world they lived in. And so they would often also try and get in touch with their inner child, because if you watch a little kid draw, they're not hung up whether you like their work or not. For them, it's about the whole experience, and once the artwork's made, it's, oh yeah, I don't need it anymore. There's no value placed on it. It's all about the experience. And you go, oh, can I have this? Can I stick it on my fridge? And I go, oh yeah, whatever. They couldn't care less. For them, it's a cathartic experience. And catharticism is basically when you get something off your chest, you get it out of your system. A really bad example is when you're feeling really sick and all you want to do is vomit. And once you vomit, then you feel better. That's cathartic. When you're really upset, and if you could just have a really good cry or a good scream, once you get that off your chest, somehow you feel better. That's cathartic. And so they were wondering how to get back in contact with the simplicity of who we are when we strip away all the other baggage. And so in order to do that, they became very inward looking. Rauschenberg was playing with that whole idea. A bed is a very personal place. This is a single bed, not a double bed. It's a very personal place. I don't know about you, but I'm sure you have dreams in there about your future. You might lie there, you might read books, and you might imagine, what am I going to be when I grow up? A lot of stuff happens in your head, in your bed. Okay? It's a very personal space. It's very inward. collective, subjective space. It becomes almost a metaphor for what the abstract expressionists were doing. But he's being humorous and ironic about it. And he doesn't try and hide the fact that he's actually starting to mock this completely angst, which means anxiety-driven movement, which essentially abstract expressionism was. And he starts to make a mockery of it and say, well, hang on, life's not that dark. I mean, Rothko ends up suiciding. He gets so caught up in his own headspace and the doom and gloom that he let his head go into. And he starts to sort of say, hey, you know, you got to step back, you know, and starts to play with the whole idea about the art world. You know, why do we take ourselves so seriously? Why do we take ourselves individually so seriously? Have a look out beyond yourself. What's going on? You need to get out of bed and actually have a look out in the world. What's going on? And he starts to use this particular artwork to make a commentary about the introspection of the art world and what abstract expressionism is looking at, and he is shifting the focus to follow what was happening in American culture at that time, which became more outward looking, more about, you know, collecting and owning stuff. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Just to wrap it up in the last couple of minutes, what I've got are 3 different artworks, so you've got specific works that you can reference. And essentially, the information that's written with it, I mean, sorry to insult your intelligence, but essentially what the message of this work, according to this writer, is that art is something that you piss on. That's what Duchamp was basically saying. And by doing so, you can upset the establishment enough to create controversy, to create conversation. So if you come into contact with an artwork that upsets you, it's a deliberate intent by the artist, because that artist wants to create controversy. They want you to, you know, be pushed beyond your comfort zone more often than not. Okay? And this was the beginnings of it. This artwork, just to give you some historical context, was a deliberate ploy by Duchamp to actually see how clever the Americans really were in the early 20th century. So he's in America. He's moved there after. Remember, yesterday we looked at Nude Descending a Staircase, and everyone freaked out when he actually produced that, and they sort of went, how is that art? And they were quite offended by it. 2 years later, he's back. And this time he's moved to America because it's much safer there. And he's brought this artwork and he sets it up. So the creation and submission of Fountain into the exhibition run by the New York Society of Independent Artists, by the way, Duchamp was a part of this group of artists, can thus be seen in part as an experiment by Duchamp to test the commitment of the New American Society to freedom of expression and its tolerance of new conceptions of art. So he's a part of the committee that puts this exhibition together. It's called the Armory Show. And he doesn't tell anybody about it. He signs it en masse, so there's no way it can be traced back to him. And he puts it on, he sends it in to be exhibited, and the rest of the people, except for one other person who photographed the original artwork, don't know it's his. And they are so challenged by this work that they decide they can't put it on exhibition. It's just too outrageous. So Fountain tested the beliefs about art and the role of taste in the art world, especially in a very conservative America. And they interviewed him in 1964, so it's 50 years later. And Duchamp said he chose the urinal in part because it thought it had the least chance of being liked, although many at the time did find it aesthetically pleasing, which is quite funny. He continued, I was drawing people's attention to the fact that art is a mirage. A mirage, exactly like an oasis, appears in the desert. It is very beautiful until, of course, you are dying of thirst. But you don't die in the field of art. The mirage is solid. What do you think he means by that statement? Because they're likely to give you a quote like that in an exam. What would you do with it? What does he mean by art is like a mirage? Anyone know what a mirage is? Okay, really, really hot day, you're driving along in the car and there's that shimmery light, looks like water on the road. Seen that? That's a mirage, because as you drive up to that spot, it's disappeared. You're in the desert, you're walking a lot, you're dying of thirst. That will happen there. It's heat and light. It's a reflection. It doesn't exist. It's an illusion. So if we go, I was drawing people's attention to the fact that art is an illusion. Will this help? An illusion exactly like an oasis appears in the desert. It's not really there. It is very beautiful until, of course, you're dying of thirst and it can't actually produce anything for you. But you don't die in the field of art. The illusion is solid. What does he mean by that?
Art and corruption staff and students, but just a reminder to our bronze and silver Principals Award winners from last week's assembly that there is a morning tea